Hello, my name is Mohammed Kimji. We have seen that book number 11 begins with a new day, and I mentioned that this will be a very long, hard, intense day of battle that won't come to an end until the end of book number 18. Sunset on this day will take place in book number 18, line 241. Now, during this battle, we see that a number of critical fighters on the Achaean side are wounded. Among them are Agamemnon, who was wounded by Coon, Odysseus, who was wounded by Socos, and Diomedes, who was wounded by Paris. Paris also wounded Eurypylus and Machaon, the physician in the Achaean army. We know that Achilles in book number 11 is watching all of this unfold, and he orders Patroclus, his companion, to leave the shelter and to find out if the man whom he thinks is Machaon, who is wounded, is actually Machaon. And we saw in book number 11 that the narrative space from the point that Patroclus leaves Achilles' shelter to the time that he arrives at Nestor's ship is very, very small. I don't know, I think it was something like 27 lines. But Patroclus will not return to his shelter until the opening of book number 16. So, from the later part of book number 11 right through book number 15, Patroclus is still away from the shelter. Now, he left Nestor's shelter shortly after he confirmed that this was Machaon, and after Nestor tried to persuade him to obey him, since Nestor was the elder, in getting Achilles to come back to battle. And if that doesn't work, then at least for Achilles to give Patroclus his armor so that Patroclus can come in with Achilles' armor and have the effect of repelling the Trojans' attack. Now, again, in book number 15, Patroclus still hasn't returned to Achilles' shelter from Nestor's ship. In fact, we learn in book number 15 that he is still tending to Eurypylus, whom he encountered at the end of book number 11, and helping him heal his wound. We know that sunset on the day that began at the opening of book number 11 will be book number 18, line 241. And book number 14 ends with Poseidon leading the Achaians on a very effective counter offensive. It won't last very long, but at line number 510 of book number 14, we read that the glorious shaker of the earth, that's Poseidon, bent the way of the battle. Now, this idea of bending the way of the battle reminds me of the two other instances up to this point where Agamemnon bent the heart of his brother Menelaus. There were two instances where Agamemnon bent the heart of his brother Menelaus. The first was in book number 6, where Menelaus is supplicated by Adrastos, who begs for his life, and Agamemnon says, not even the unborn in the not even the unborn man child in the woman will survive Troy. And he killed Adrastos. And the second instance um, where the where Agamemnon bent the heart of his brother was at in book number 7, was in book number 7. This is at 120. And this is the point where Menelaus actually takes on Hector's challenge to fight him. And Agamemnon at that point indicated that he's no match for Hector, and he bent the heart of his brother. Now, when we think about bending the way of the battle, or bending the heart, um, it it clearly points to the sheer power of the god Poseidon, who takes the Achaians from really the brink and gives them some hope. Um, and it's also interesting when you think about how Agamemnon bends the heart of his brother. There you get the power of persuasion. Um, this is not, again, as I've mentioned before, words that you would use to describe a reasoned dialogue. As I mentioned, there are two ways in which power is expressed in the Iliad, two main ways in which human beings win distinction. One of the ways is on the battlefield, and one of the ways is through the power of words. Because even speech is a competitive struggle for honor and power. Book number 15 begins in the following way. But after they, the Trojans, had crossed back over the ditch and the sharp stakes and flight, and many had gone down under the hands of the Danaans, they checked about once more and stood their ground by the chariots, green for fear and terrified. But now Zeus, wakened by Hera of the gold throne on the high places of Ida, stood suddenly upright and saw the Achaians and Trojans, these driven to flight, the others harrying them in confusion, these last, Argives, and saw among them the lord Poseidon. He saw Hector lying in the plain, his companions sitting around him. He gazed at the heart and breathing painfully, vomiting blood, since not the weakest Achaian had hit him. We know that in book number, was it 14? Hera had deceived Zeus. First of all, she deceived Aphrodite to giving her the power to infatuate or possess with love. She deceived sleep, or at least she bribed sleep to aid her in getting Zeus to become incapacitated while Poseidon wreaked havoc on the Trojans. And of course, Hera deceived Zeus. She beguiled him. Zeus was taken by the power of love, and while he was sleeping, Poseidon had turned, bent the way of the battle. Well, Zeus wakes up in book number 15 and he sees what is happening. Hector, we know in book number 15, book number 14 was smashed in the chest by a stone. And actually in book number 14, that stone, that rock that Aias had picked up was described as a holding stone for the fast ships. This is at line 410 of book number 14. Aias picked up a holding stone for fast ships. This holding stone is an anchor stone. One can imagine how heavy it would have to be to anchor a ship. And he throws it at Hector, and it hits Hector in the chest, and he is incapacitated. So Zeus sees Hector vomiting blood at the opening of book number 15, and he tells Hera, realizing what has happened, that he has been deceived. Hopeless one, It was your evil design, your treachery, Hera, that stayed brilliant Hector from battle, terrified his people. I do not know, perhaps for this contrivance of evil and pain. You will win first reward when I lash you with whip strokes. Do you not remember that time you hung from high, and on your feet I slung two anvils, and about your hand drove a golden chain unbreakable? He actually kept Hera hanging upside down. An anvil is the large metal block that blacksmiths use when they are forging metal, when they are shaping metal. This block absorbs the vibrations of the hammer that is used. Well, Zeus orders Hera to summon Iris, who is the messenger god, to him, and to summon Apollo. And he says at line number 54, summon Iris to come here to me, and Apollo, the glorious archer, so that Iris may go among the bronze-armored people of the Achaians and give a message to Lord Poseidon to leave the fighting and come back to the home that is his. Also let Phoebus Apollo stir Hector back into battle, breathe strength into him once more, and make him forget the agonies that now are wearing out his senses. Let him drive strengthless panic into the Achaians and turn them back once more. Let them be driven in flight and tumble back on the benched ships of Achilles. Now, you can see how, in fact, the momentum in the war is very much dependent on the will of the gods. And as Poseidon shifted the momentum in book number, actually 13 and 14, I can't remember in book number 12, 13 and 14. So Zeus is going to turn the momentum, and it's going to be actually quite sudden. And the Achaians are going to be in the worst possible situation they could be in by the end of book number 14, book number 15, without being destroyed. As a matter of fact, it's in this book that Hector is very, very, very close to burning the Achaean ships. So all the work that Poseidon has done is just undone with Zeus's will. I will not let any other of the immortals, Zeus says, this is at 73 onwards, I will not let any other of the immortals stand there by the Danaans until the thing asked by the son of Peleus has been accomplished, as I undertook at the first and bent my head in assent on that day when, embracing my knees, immortal Thetis supplicated honor for Achilles, sacker of cities. This, of course, refers to what Thetis had done in book number 1, when she supplicated on the order of Achilles, when she supplicated Zeus to give strength to the Trojans to pin the Achaians back against their own ships. Hera does not disobey Zeus. And again, the relation between Hera and Zeus is also a power relation. Otherwise, you wouldn't speak about obeying or disobeying. This is very, very common language, even in the language among the closest of friends and what you and I might think might be the closest of relations. There is no closeness between Hera and Zeus as you and I understand closeness. So Hera is described in the following way: as the thought flashes in the mind of a man who, traversing much territory, thinks of things in the mind's awareness, I wish I were in this place or this, and imagines many things, so rapidly in her eagerness winged Hera, a goddess. This is really remarkable. We've seen how Hera has been described as on a horse that is, in one leap, covering the distance that is the visible distance to the horizon of a human being. And here it seems like as the mind, can think of one place and then think of a place completely different, so Hera covers that distance just like that. And it reminds us once again of a point that I've repeated many, many times, that the difference between the gods and the mortals, as expressed within this poem, is quantitative. It is not qualitative. Insofar as the gods are represented as thinkable by mortals. So again, they are stronger, they are faster, they cover more distance, they are larger, they are louder, they fall harder when they fall, and so on. Insofar as the gods can be represented by mortals, then of course we have seen in our work on Plato and ancient Greek philosophy that the divine ultimately is unknowable. And we also see some indications of that at certain points in the Iliad. So, insofar as the gods are thinkable, they are reflections of human beings and are only quantitatively different in all metrics. What Plato will show through the mouthpiece Socrates is that, in fact, these representations of the gods are expressing human ignorance, which cannot know the divine that it always desires. Now, jumping to about 143, Hera called to come with her outside the house Apollo and Iris. And these gods are summoned to Zeus. And Zeus orders Iris to take the message to Poseidon to quit the war and the fighting and to go back away from the fighting, whether in the sea or whether to Mount Olympus. But he must stop. And Poseidon agrees at 211, reluctantly, to give way. It's interesting. I don't know what the ancient Greek word that is used here, but we know that when Agamemnon uses the word give way, when he says in book number 9, let Achilles give way, he meant by that, let him be subdued, let him be domesticated the way a wild animal is domesticated by a trainer. A wild horse is broken by a horse breaker. And it's interesting because again, you see in the lines that fall in between, the summons by Thetis and Poseidon's giving in. You see that Poseidon doesn't want to do this. In fact, he asserts his own authority as being Zeus's brother, and ultimately he is also contesting for power, but he understands that he cannot compete with Zeus. So at line number 217, 218, maybe 218, 219, Poseidon leaves the Achaean people. This is going to mark yet another momentum shift back on the side of the Trojans, particularly when Apollo enters the battle in favor of the Trojans. And Zeus speaks to Apollo, and he says to Apollo at line number 231, "Let your own concern be glorious Hector." He had mentioned that Hector would have the glory until the sun goes down. The sun goes down in book number 18, line 241. There is still some ways to go in the narrative space of the poem. He had summoned Iris to carry this message to Hector. And it's not a surprise then that Hector is going to once again drive the Achaians all the way back to the ships. At line number 236, Zeus spoke so, and Apollo, not disregarding his father, came down along the mountains of Ida in the likeness of a rapid hawk, the dove's murderer, and swiftest of all things flying. Again, the simile that is used to represent the movement of Apollo is like a hawk. We know that a hawk is a predatory bird. It's not like a dove that the hawk eats. It kind of signifies that it's going to be the Achaians who are going to be more like doves in the forthcoming moments. Apollo finds Hector and speaks to him. He says at line number 254, "Take heart. Such an avenger am I, whom the son of Kronos sent down from Ida to stand by your side and defend you. Phoebus Apollo of the golden sword, who in time before this also have stood to defend yourself and your sheer citadel. So come now, and urge on your cavalry in their numbers to drive on their horses against the hollow ships. Meanwhile, I shall move on before you and make all the way for the horses smooth before them and bend back the Achaean fighters." The language of bending back is once again used. This time it is Apollo, on the orders of Zeus, who's going to bend the battle. He spoke and breathed huge strength into the shepherd of the people, as when some stalled horse who has been corn-fed at the manger, breaking free of his rope, gallops over the plain in thunder to his accustomed bathing space in a sweet running river, and in the pride of his strength holds high his head, and the mane floats over his shoulders, sure of his glorious strength. The quick knees carry him to the loved places and the pasture of horses. So Hector, moving rapidly, his feet and his knees went onward. Now, it's very interesting, this idea that Hector is represented as a horse that has been corn-fed and that now gallops over the plain to a bathing place in a sweet river. This is how Paris is described in book number 6, when Hector, after Hector scolds Paris, when he goes back into the Trojan city and he sees Paris polishing up his armor, he finds Paris on Hector's way back to the fighting. And this is how Paris is described. It's interesting that Hector would be described in the same way in this moment as his brother, whom he had said in book number 3, when he saw Paris shrink from Menelaus, that he wishes he had never been born. or had died unwedded, and that the Trojans are cowards in truth, else long before this you would have worn a mantle of flying stones. You would have been stoned to death. Now, this is not the only way Hector is described. We know that Paris, as a matter of fact, is a very strong fighter. Hector himself says this, that when you put your mind to it, you are a very strong fighter. So it's not that strange, but it still is strange, or at least would be, if what followed didn't express Hector in stronger terms. And just a few lines later, Hector is described as a great bearded lion. That's more like it. So the Danaans, until that time, kept always in close chase, assembled, stabbing at them with swords and leaf-headed spears. But when they saw Hector once more ranging the men's ranks, they were frightened, and by their feet collapsed all their bravery. That happens at 275 to 280. Now, the leader of the Aetolians, which is a place in the western part of central Greece, his name is Thoas. He counsels the Achaians. At line number 295, he says, "Let us tell the multitude to make its way back toward the vessels, while we ourselves," referring to the strongest among them, "who claim that we are the greatest of all the army, stand, and see if we can face Hector first and hold him off from them with spears lifted against him. And I think for all his fury, his heart will be afraid to plunge into our Danaan company." This is the counsel of Thoas, leader of the Aetolians, to the strongest of the Achaians. So he spoke, and they listened to him. And some fighters that we have seen before are mentioned, who take up this challenge: Idomeneus, Teucros, Meriones, Meges, and Aias, whom they rally behind. Aias, son of Telamon. Meanwhile, behind them, the multitude of the Achaians made their way back toward the ships of the Achaians. The Trojans came down on them in a pack, and Hector led them in long strides, and in front of him went Phoebus Apollo. There is a battle cry, incessant clamor, screams on both sides. Line number 318. So long as Phoebus Apollo held stilled in his hands the aegis, this is a terrifying symbol, so long the thrown weapons of both took hold, and men dropped under them. But when he stared straight into the eyes of the fast-mounted Danaans and shook the aegis, this must be a shield with a terrifying symbol that makes men cower, and himself gave a great battle cry. The spirit inside them was mazed to hear it. They forgot their furious valor. And they, as when in the dim of the black night two wild beasts stampede a herd of cattle or big flock of sheep, falling suddenly upon them when no herdsman is by, the Achaians fled. So in their weakness and terror, since Apollo drove terror upon them and gave the glory to the Trojans and Hector. Now, you might be wondering, why is Zeus giving glory to Hector? Well, we know that he must fulfill the oath that he gave to Thetis via Achilles to give glory to Hector in order to drive the Achaians back against their ships. But why does he want the Achaians driven against their ships? In order to give glory to Achilles. And so the question that any reader must ask, is Zeus giving glory to Hector in order to take it away? Because the glory cannot be shared by the greatest fighter in the Achaean side and the greatest fighter in the Trojan side. Well, we will see what happens. At line number 343, the Achaeans, blundering about the deep dug ditch and the sharp stakes, ran this way and that in terror, forced into their rampart. So now we find the Trojans pushing the Achaeans past their ditch to the ramparts, and ultimately they're going to breach the ramparts also. But Hector called aloud in a piercing cry to the Trojans, "Make hard for the ships! Let their bloody spoils be." He doesn't want his men to waste time stripping the armor off the corpses. He orders them to push onward. "Make hard for the ships, let the bloody spoils be. That man I see in the other direction, apart from the vessels. I will take care that he gets his death. And that man's relations, neither men nor women, shall give his dead body the right of burning. In the space before our city, the dogs shall tear him to pieces." Who is he speaking about there? Is he speaking about? Let me find it. So it is interesting. That man, Hector says, "That man I see in the other direction, apart from the vessels, I will take care that he gets his death. And that man's relations, neither men nor women shall give his dead body the right of burning." That man is not mentioned here. And we will see whether it comes up. My guess is it would be Aias, who is leading the front lines of the Achaeans. Line 355 onwards, Phoebus Apollo easily kicking them with his feet. So look at how this is described. It seems like Apollo breaks the edge of the ditch, maybe to allow easy access for the men and the horses, because as I mentioned before, the ditch is curved inwards so that, you know, there's a drop from the top of the lip to the ground. It makes it doesn't just go in an incline. It's actually there's actually a concave shape to it. And so what we find here is that Apollo actually breaks the edge of the ditch, maybe to allow easy access. So speaking with a whip stroke from the shoulder, this is a 352, he lashed on his horses, calling across the ranks to the Trojans, who along with him all cried aloud as they steered the horses who pulled their chariots with inhuman clamor. What does that mean? Inhuman clamor. What is a clamor that is not human? Clearly, this is what men do. This is what it means to be a man, to fight in the thick of battle. Many times, the forces are advised, be men now. It's like, don't shrink, but fight. And yet it's inhuman. There is something about the greatness of the human being in the Iliad that is not human. When Hector was at his best, He was described as a gorgon, a creature that was so terrifying that even gazing upon him would make you turn to stone. With inhuman clamor, and in front of them, Phoebus Apollo, easily kicking them with his feet, tumbled the banked edges of the deep ditch into the pit between, tumbling the edges, the banked edges of the deep ditch into the pit between. So this must be the lip, that Apollo is breaking the lip so that there is an incline that allows for easy access for the Trojans. And bridged over a pathway both wide and long, about as long as the force of a spear cast goes when a man has thrown it to try a strength. So as far as one can throw a spear, that's the length of the ditch. Length would have to be the the space that could accommodate so many Trojan troops, and the width would have to be the space from one side of the ditch to the other that they must cross. They streamed over in massed formation, with Apollo in front of them, holding the tremendous aegis, and wrecked the bastions of the Achaians easily, as when a little boy piles sand by the seashore, when in his innocent play he makes sand towers to amuse him, and then still playing with hands and feet ruins them and wrecks them. So you, Lord Apollo, piled in confusion much hard work and painful. So you, Lord Apollo, piled in confusion much hard work and painful done by the Argives and drove terror among them. Don't know if that's grammatically correct. Doesn't sound like it. But you see that the Achaean fortresses, their defenses, are like sand castles that a human being just kicks over and reduces to nothing, as though they never were. Nestor is praying to Zeus at this point. At line number 375, save us from the day without pity. So he spoke in prayer, and Zeus of the councils thundered a great stroke, hearing the prayer of the old man, the son of Neleus. Now, when Nestor prays for safety from Zeus, and Zeus sends the thunderstroke, this must be a lightning stroke. Hektor interprets the sign as a sign that Zeus favors them, the Trojans. And we've talked about how, in fact, something in nature, there's no way to know what any event in nature actually is. There's no way to know whether it is a sign or if it's just a happening in nature. And there's no way to know, if it is a sign, what that sign means. And this is another instance of that, where the very same thing is seen by both sides, but they interpret them in different ways. And Hektor interprets this as in his favor. Now, it's very interesting because, again, Zeus is on the side of the Trojans at this point. So that the sign follows upon Nestor's prayer does not mean that Zeus is going to give strength to the Achaians as Nestor was praying for. And it's not entirely clear what this sign means even to the reader after reading the narrative, because while Hektor does make it to the ships, he doesn't manage to destroy the Achaians at this point. And it could be read as meaning that Zeus is helping the Achaeans defend against the Trojans' attack, it could be read to mean that Zeus is helping the Trojans make it all the way to the Achaean ships. But the Trojans, hearing the thunderstroke, 379 onwards, hearing the thunderstroke of Zeus of the Aegis, remembered even more their warcraft and sprang on the Argives. They, as when the big waves on the sea, wide wandering, wash across the walls of a ship underneath the leaning forces of the wind, which particularly pile up the big waves, so the Trojans, with huge clamor, went over the rampart and drove their horses to fight alongside the grounded vessels. So here they breach the rampart. It sounds like they climb over it. But we already know that there actually is a hole. The gate is actually broken of the Achaean wall. Line number 390. Meanwhile, Patroclus, all the time the Achaeans and Trojans were fighting on both sides of the wall, far away from the fast ships, had sat all this time in the shelter of courtly Eurypylus, and had been entertaining him with words and applying medicines that would mitigate the black pains to the sore wound. So all this time, from the time that Patroclus meets Eurypylus at the end of book number 11 until now, book number 15, he has been tending to Eurypylus' wounds. Now, the shelter of Eurypylus here, in book number 11, we were told that he had met Eurypylus at Odysseus' shelter. So it's not clear whether this is Odysseus' shelter or if this is Eurypylus' shelter. Sounds like Eurypylus is with Odysseus in Odysseus' shelter, but not much hangs on that. So Patroclus will not arrive at Achilles' ships until the opening of book number 16. But when Patroclus saw the Trojans were sweeping over the rampart, and the outcry and the noise of terror rose from the Danaans, Patroclus groaned aloud and then struck himself on both thighs with the flats of his hands and spoke a word of lamentation. Eurypylus, much though you need me, I cannot stay here longer with you. Well, he's going to be heading back to Achilles. And the battle at this point is taking place right at the ships, with the Trojans wanting to burn the ships, the Achaeans fighting for their lives to defend the ships. At line number 484, we see that Hektor rallies the Trojans. And shortly after, we read that Aias is rallying the Achaians. Let's see what Hektor says as he is rallying the Trojans at, let's go to 494 onwards. Fight on then by the ships together. He who among you finds by spear thrown or spear thrust his death and destiny, let him die. He has no dishonor when he dies defending his country, for then his wife shall be saved, and his children afterward, and his house and property shall not be damaged, if the Achaeans must go away with their ships to the beloved land of their fathers. Look at how inconsequential it is if a man, even a hero, dies. It is not dishonorable. It is better to die with honor than to live without it. It is better to die and be spoken about after one is dead, be spoken about in glowing light, than not to be spoken about at all when one lives a long life. Glory, honor, more important than life. Well, in the ensuing carnage, Hector tells Melanippus a very interesting lines at 557. Sooner we must kill them, or else sheer Ilion be stormed utterly by them, and her citizens be killed. Right? Two options only. Either we kill them, or they kill us. There is no third option. There is no possibility of both the Achaians and the Trojans living. Short time later, Melanippus is killed by Nestor's son Antilochus. Well, Aias is stirring the Achaean troops, and at line number 592, the Trojans, in the likeness of ravening lions, swept on against the ships and were bringing to accomplishment Zeus's orders, who wakened always the huge strength in them, dazed the courage of the Argives, and denied their glory, and stirred on the others. Zeus's desire was to give glory to the son of Priam, Hector, that he might throw on the curved ships the inhuman, weariless strength of fire, and so make completely accomplish the prayer of Thetis. So make completely accomplish the prayer of Thetis? Watch what happens. Therefore, Zeus of the councils waited the sight before his eyes of the flare when a single ship burned. From there on, he would make the attack of the Trojans surge back again from the ships and give the Danaans glory. With this in mind, he drove on against the hollow ships, Hector, Priam's son. So Zeus is giving glory to Hector in order to give glory to Achilles. And that once the Achaean ship is lit on fire, that's the point where the Trojans' fortunes would be reversed. That means that Zeus is giving glory to Hector in order to take it away. What kind of a glory is this? How is this favor? What does it tell you about the gods? What does it tell you about the king of the gods? What does it tell you about human beings who worship a God that gives glory in order to take it away? With this in mind, he drove on against the hollow ships Hector, Priam's son, though Hector without the god was in fury and raged, as when destructive fire or spear-shaking Ares rages among the mountains and dense places of the deep forest. A slaver came out around his mouth. This is running saliva. And under the lowering brows, his eyes were glittering. The helm on his temples was shaken and thundered horribly to the fighting of Hector. Out of the bright sky, Zeus himself was working to help him. What kind of help is this? What does help mean? When it lasts a very limited period of time before the fortunes of the man who is helped are reversed. Out of the bright sky, Zeus himself was working to help him, and among men so numerous, he honored this one man and glorified him, since Hector was to have only a short life, and already the day of his death was being driven upon him. Achilles will have a short life. His mother says in book number 1 that he bore him to a miserable destiny. Achilles mentions in book number 9 that he has two fates, one of two fates. Either life but no glory, or glory and no life. There's no third option of having life with glory. 622. So the Danaans stood steady against the Trojans, nor gave way. But he, lit about with flame on all sides, charged on their numbers, and descended upon them as descends on a fast ship the battering wave storm-bred from beneath the clouds, and the ship goes utterly hidden under the foam, and the dangerous blast of the hurricane thunders against the sail, and the hearts of the seamen are shaken with fear, as they are carried only a little way out of death's reach. So the heart and the breast of each Achaean was troubled. Hector came on against them as a murderous lion on cattle. Look at these two similes. On the one hand, Hector is like a giant tidal wave in a stormy sea that smashes against the hull, and the men barely escape with their life. And the wave inspires terror in the men. And then Hector is described like a lion, murderous lion encountering cattle. Things aren't looking good for the Achaians at this point. At line number 636, 637, now the Achaians fled in unearthly terror before Father Zeus and Hector. What does this mean, unearthly terror? They're fleeing on an earth that is unearthly. This unearthly terror is the sign of strength of Hector. It's not a disparaging remark. It's a remark that extols the power of Hector. And again, we see there's never any vision of the human being as being an end in himself. There's never a vision of the human being as being the highest conceivable being. There's no vision of human existence as being the highest conceivable existence. The highest conceivable existence of the human being is inhuman. The highest conceivable power of the human being is inhuman power. The highest conceivable world of the human being is unearthly. Line number 654. Now they had got among the ships, the Achaians, and the ends were about them of the ships hauled up in the first line, but the Trojans swarmed on them. The Argives, under force, gave back from the first line of the ships, but along the actual shelters they rallied in a group and did not scatter among the encampment. Shame held them in fear. Shame, right? The shame of not being spoken about in a way that brings honor. The shame of having no burial. The shame of having lost. The shame of being eaten by the dogs and the birds. Nestor at this point supplicates each man. Nestor, the Achaeans' watcher, supplicated each man by the knees for the sake of his parents. Line number 6. 60. Dear friends, be men. There we go. Be men. Let shame be in your hearts. Notice how, again, how important honor is, how important a name is. A name that is more important than actual life. 674. Aias went in huge strides up and down the decks of the vessels. He wielded in his hands a great pike. A pike is a weapon with pointed steel at the end. Steel or iron on a wooden shaft. We are told that Aias's pike is 22 cubits long. A cubit is about the length of a forearm. So maybe about a foot. 22 feet. Line number 687. He kept up a terrible bellow and urged on the Danaans to defend their ships and their shelters, while on the other side Hektor would not stay back among the mass of close-armored Trojans, but as a flashing eagle makes his plunge upon other flying birds. So Hektor steered the course of his outrush straight for the vessel. 696. Now once again a grim battle was fought between the vessels. You would say they faced each other unbruised, unwearied in the fighting, from the speed in which they went for each other. This was the thought in each as they struggled on. The Achaians thought they could not get clear of the evil but must perish, while the heart inside each one of the Trojans was hopeful to set fire to the ships and kill the fighting men of Achaia. With such thoughts in mind, they stood up to fight with each other. Hektor caught hold of the stern of grand, fast-running, seafaring ship that once had carried Protesilaus. Now, Protesilaus was the first to land in Troy. He was also the first to be killed. We are told that in book number 2, lines 698 to 702. Hektor is holding on to this man's ship, the first to arrive, first to die, and did not take him back to the land of the fathers, Protesilaus. It was around his ship that now Achaians and Trojans cut each other down at close quarters. They're fighting in very, very close proximity. Not any longer had patience for the volleys exchanged from bows and javelins, but stood up close against each other, matching their fury, and fought their battle with sharp hatchets and axes. In close combat, they're fighting with axes, with great swords, and with leaf-headed pikes. And many magnificent swords were scattered along the ground, black-thonged, heavy-hilted, sometimes dropping from the hands, some glancing from shoulders of men as they fought, so the ground ran black with blood. Hektor would not let go of the stern of a ship where he had caught hold of it, but gripped the sternpost in his hands and called to the Trojans. And he cries out to his men, "Bring fire," and give single voice to the clamor of battle. Now Zeus has given us a day worth all the rest of them. Zeus has given us a day worth all the rest of them. This is the crowning moment when Hektor and the Trojans are going to burn the Achaean ships. Of course, if this day is worth all the days of the past, what is the day in which Hektor's fortunes are reversed going to say about this day? I'm thinking of what Aristotle had said in the Nicomachean Ethics and Metaphysics. Look to your end. The fortunes of men are in perpetual reversal precisely because their life is not in their hands. But how is the man going to die? Socrates showed that all human beings must lack their end, the form of the good or knowledge or the divine that every man seeks. The end of all men will ultimately be the same insofar as there is no man who can attain that which he desires. Precisely because to desire something is to lack it, and the end which all men seek is opposed to what any man can be. It is unchanging, it is immortal, it is indivisible, it is unthinkable. It is not relative to any observer, which means that no observer can relate to it. Well, he spoke. This is at line number 726. He spoke, and they thereby came on harder against the Argives. Their volleys were too much for Aias, who could hold no longer his place, but had to give back a little, expecting to die there. This is really the first time, I think, where you have the Achaians as a whole expecting to die. Here we are told that Aias expects to die. Earlier, we were told that the Achaians expect to die. And Aias is forced back a little bit. Last lines, book number 15. 743. And whenever some Trojan crashed against the hollow ships with burning fire, who sought to wake the favor of Hektor, Aias would wait for him and then stab with a long pike, and so from close up wounded 12 in front of the vessels. At this point, there are no ships that are burning. Aias is able to hold them off for now, even though he's giving way slowly. But, or at least gave way from his original position. Book number 15 ends with Aias wounding 12 Trojan men. In book number 16, the ship will actually be set on fire. Book 16 is next. My name is Mohammed Kimji. If you are interested in connecting with me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Thank you for your attention.